AI Max is another step in Google Ads' evolution towards broader targeting and automation, and unsurprisingly, a lot of advertisers are looking at AI Max with suspicion. Google Ads account reps, on the other hand, are pushing AI Max like it's the best invention since sliced bread. Google even included AI Max to their Power Pack account structure during Google Marketing Live 2025. So, who is right? Is AI Max a must-have for Google Ads accounts in 2025 and beyond? Or is AI Max just another way for Google to squeeze as much budget out of you as possible? We at ROImonks have been testing this feature for the last 5 months, with over $20,000 spent on AI Max by one of our clients, and I'm going to share the results of the test with you in this video. Plus, I will share a few agency-tested tips about AI Max so that Google doesn't just burn your budget without any return. Check out the links of ROImonks in the description. Subscribe to the channel for more agency-backed tips, strategies, and case studies. And without further ado, let's get into it. Before we get to the testing part, it's important to understand how AI Max works. At the core of it, AI Max is just an opt-in setting in your search campaigns, and the idea behind it is that it lets Google AI choose your targeting, select the landing page for your ad, and even generate the ad copy for you automatically. Luckily, AI Max is not a complete black box like Performance Max campaigns were when they were first launched. With AI Max, you have a good amount of control over how much automation you want to use. So if you turn AI Max on, you will have some additional settings at both campaign and ad group levels. Let's go through this one by one, as they're really good at showcasing how AI Max works. At the campaign level, you're going to have 2 AI Max settings, first being text customization, the second one being final URL expansion. Text customization, formerly known as automatically created assets, is going to allow Google to use your website landing pages, your ads, and your provided assets to automatically create an ad copy that Google believes will convert well for this specific user. Final URL expansion, on the other hand, is about your landing page. And as the name implies, final URL expansion is going to allow Google to choose what URL to use as the landing page in your AI Max ads based on your page performance, user's search query, and other user signals that Google might have on this person. If you keep both of these options off, it means that Google will stick strictly to the ad copy and landing pages that you have provided in your campaign. But when you have text customization and final URL expansion both turned on and working together, it will help Google craft an ad copy that better matches both the landing page and also the user's search intent. So when using AI Max, I highly recommend you turn on both of these settings. And in the tests that we've done, we've also kept both of these on. Of course, if you are operating in a compliance-heavy industry like health or finance, and you need strict control over your ad copy or over your landing pages, you need to make sure that in your AI Max, you are mindful with your text customization and final URL expansion settings. In this case, a key option when it comes to URL expansion that you need to know about is URL exclusions, which is going to allow you to exclude certain URLs from final URL expansion. Essentially, you're going to forbid Google from using these URLs as your final URLs in your AI Max ads. So if you have any pages that might not be fully compliant, you can exclude them here. Otherwise, I would be hesitant about URL exclusions, and I would much rather let AI Max learn and find top converting pages for me, especially if we're talking about a strong website. Additionally, in AI Max at the campaign level, you can also set brand inclusions or brand exclusions. And this is also a key point, a pro tip, if you will, that you might not get from other channels. So subscribe and smash that like button if you found this video helpful. But essentially, assuming you have a separate branding and non-branding search campaigns, it's critical for you to add your own brand as AI Max brand exclusion in your non-branding campaign. Because otherwise, AI Max is going to tap into your brand terms and thus inflate its effectiveness and attributions, when in reality you're trying to test AI Max for capturing new customers, not your brand searches. And on the other hand, if you're running AI Max in your branding campaign, you need to include your own brand here under brand inclusions. This is the approach we took in our testing as well, and I'm going to share the results with you in a bit. Another pro tip: if you're running AI Max in your branding campaign, you might want to avoid automatic text customization and perhaps even turn off URL expansion, because especially when users type your brand, you might want to have more control over how your brand is presented on Google in front of people who are searching for you. In our case, we've tested AI Max in the branding campaign without any asset optimization, and it has worked well. So I also suggest you to try it out like that as well, at least at first. So we've covered campaign level settings for AI Max. Now let's move to the ad group level settings. The first setting that you're going to see here is search term matching, and essentially if you turn it on, it's going to expand your current keywords in this ad group to broad match, as well as use keywordless technology from dynamic search ads in order to find more relevant and high-performing search queries that you'd otherwise miss. However, and this is a key insight that we learned from our channels at the agency, search term matching is not going to expand beyond broad match and dynamic search. So like in our case, in our testing, we have already been using broad match and dynamic search extensively in the account. In fact, almost all ad groups in our search campaigns were using broad match with a few minor exceptions. So if you are already using mostly broad match and dynamic search ads, AI Max is not going to go beyond your current targeting. In fact, the power of AI Max is not even necessarily in expanding your targeting, but instead it's in increasing your quality scores and therefore your ad rank in your auctions. And this is also something that we learned from our channels within Google. The real power of AI Max is in increasing your quality scores and ad relevance by allowing Google to automatically generate an ad copy and select a landing page from your site. Maybe you already have really wide, broad targeting, but you might not have a super relevant ad copy for every possible search, and maybe you don't have the perfect landing page set for each search either. So the power of AI Max is going for those niche search queries, drafting a highly relevant ad copy, and finding the most relevant landing page that would perform best based on Google's data, all within the auctions that you were already participating in before, if you were using broad match, of course. But because of better ad relevance and quality scores, you're going to have higher ad rank, which will lead to you winning more of these auctions, and that's how you're going to get more impressions, more clicks, and more conversions. The next setting available here for AI Max at the ad group level is brand inclusions, which can limit the ad group to only searches related to a specified brand or a list of brands, and your ad group brand inclusions will override your campaign level brand inclusions. Brand inclusions can be particularly useful if you are maybe working with multiple brands and you want to have more precise control over which ad copy is associated with which brand. So in this case, you would use the brand inclusions feature here to make sure that ads in this ad group specifically will be associated with just searches for this specific brand or a list of brands. Next feature is locations of interest, and this one is also interesting and has a lot of good use cases. And specifically, it's about, as the name implies, the interest that people have in locations. And what's interesting is that the campaign settings in terms of location will still apply. So for example, if you're promoting hotels in Madrid, you're able to target people who live in the United States but express interest in Spain. In this case, at the campaign level, set the United States as the targeting location. Usually I recommend setting it to presence, and at the same time, Set Spain as a location of interest at the ad group level. This way, you can target people who are always present or are regularly present in the United States, and at the same time have expressed interest in Spain. And it also is important to note that both criteria have to be met. So your campaign level location targeting and your ad group level location of interest have to work together. If this doesn't make sense for your business, you can just skip it. And finally, you have URL inclusions here, which allows you to use only certain URL landing pages for this particular ad group. Of course, by default, Google AI is going to select what it believes to be the best performing landing page from your website. But if you have a certain business logic, or maybe you work in a compliance-heavy field where you can only use specific landing pages, use this here as the URL inclusion. In general, I would recommend keeping this untouched and letting AI Max choose the right landing page unless you have some strict business logic or compliance requirements. So this is all good and fine, but when do you actually use AI Max so that you don't just burn your budget for nothing? We've compiled a checklist of requirements that you need to check off in order to maximize your chances of success with AI Max. First of all, you should use AI Max if you have a strong, up-to-date site that represents your brand, your product, or your service well, because your website is where Google is going to be pulling all this information from in order to use it in your ad copy and in order to match users' intent with the landing page. So you need to make sure that your website is on point first, and then you can consider AI Max. Number two, if you have a mature Google Ads account and you're already successfully using broad match keywords and dynamic search ads, because as I said earlier, AI Max is going to expand your targeting to broad match. So if you're not currently using broad match and DSA, it's going to be a very large, significant shift, probably with a massive burst of spending. In this case, I recommend you to first start testing broad match, adapt your account over time to using broad match and dynamic search ads, and then test AI Max after that in order to make this a little bit more of an incremental shift for you, for your account, and for your business. The next requirement is that you need to obviously have accurate conversion tracking, as the optimization that Google is capable of achieving is only as good as the quality of data you feed it. Garbage in, garbage out. If you don't have accurate conversion tracking, then this is not even worth discussing. First of all, focus on setting up your conversion tracking and then come back to AI Max. The next requirement is that you need to have the budget and the courage to tolerate increased spending and poor results in the beginning. When we go through the results of our test, I'm going to show you how the spending behaved. But if you don't have the budget, or if you don't have the patience and the courage to tolerate these periods of underperformance, you should also not look into AI Max. You probably will test it for a few days and get discouraged and just stop the test, essentially wasting the spent budget without learning anything. So if you're not in a position for a proper test where you need to invest and stay patient for it to actually work, then AI Max is not the right feature for you at this point. So these are the requirements for you to get the most out of AI Max testing. And before we get to the results of our own testing, I want to quickly explain the reports that you can use to properly evaluate your AI Max performance. Luckily, with AI Max, we have pretty comprehensive reporting in terms of how different elements of AI Max are performing. First of all, after you turn on your AI Max, in search term report, you're going to find search terms with a new match type called AI Max. So you can filter just by this match type and review the search terms that are being served and their corresponding data. In addition, in the same search term report, you have a new view here called Search Terms and Landing Pages from AI Max. And If you select it, it's going to show you the search terms as well as the headline and the landing page of AI Max with the corresponding data. Also, when you navigate to your keywords and scroll all the way down to the bottom, you're going to see a breakdown of AI Max keywords and landing page matches here. And when you go to Insights and Reports landing pages, now under the Selected By column, you can also check which landing pages are advertiser selected and which ones have been automatically selected by Google. So now, finally, let's move on to the part you've probably been waiting for, the case study that we've prepared for this video. This is a real account where we've been testing AI Max since June. In fact, we've spent over $20,000 on AI Max over 5 months. So I'm going to share our findings with you right now. First, and this is the key point, it actually took us 1.5 months of learning, overspending, and poor performance before our conversion value to cost reached profitable levels. In fact, it was about 5 to 6 weeks where our conversion value to cost was below 1. The spending was really high in the beginning, and also we had really high CPCs in the beginning as well. In fact, for some search terms, we've seen huge CPCs, which were 10 to 15 times the average CPCs of search campaigns. But these massive CPCs were really isolated cases, and we've trusted in the process, let the campaign learn without excluding these high CPC terms, and Google did not continue investing in these massive CPC search terms. This is truly ended up being isolated cases, and CPCs came down to normal levels after 1.5 months or about 2 months. So after the initial burst of spending with low conversion value to cost, in about 5 to 6 weeks, the spending has gradually come down, so did CPCs. At the same time, click-through rates as well as conversion value to cost have gone up to a point where during months 3, 4, and 5, AI Max search terms in our reports were performing better than the rest of our non-branding search. Also, in the beginning, when we were checking the AI Max search terms, headlines, and landing pages, some landing pages were not necessarily the perfect selection that we would have made for this particular headline or search term. But again, we've let the campaign learn, because what we realized is that these issues were usually isolated. And in our case, as Google was gathering data and learning, you could tell through the reports and the data that we were receiving that AI Max is moving in the right direction. And surely, over weeks, as we were checking the data on the weekly basis, click-through rates went up and CPCs gradually came down, and the conversion value to cost went up as well. And while the AI Max test was going on, we were also monitoring the rest of our search match types, meaning all match types excluding AI Max. We also monitored our dynamic search ads and our Performance Max search performance as well. And the performance of all of these search channels was stable and even improved slightly during the testing period when we were testing AI Max. Therefore, we can conclude that AI Max did not cannibalize conversions and performance from our existing campaigns. It actually added to our account. Another interesting aspect of AI Max for search is how differently it allocates spending compared to traditional search campaigns, where a small number of keywords and a small number of search terms typically drive the majority of your spending and conversion volume in any given search campaign. With AI Max, however, when we checked our search term performance, we realized that the spend is distributed much more thinly and evenly across a huge number of search terms, thus casting a very wide and broad net of search terms. So, for example, in one of our campaigns, total spend on AI Max search terms exceeded $20,000 during the observed period, yet the single highest spending search term accounted for just over $250 in spending, with only one other search term surpassing $200. the vast majority of search terms spent between $20 and $50, and there were hundreds of them at that level. So that's also something interesting and something to keep in mind. In addition, and this also goes back to how search term matching works, which we've discussed already in this video. When we were checking the search terms for AI Max, we realized that AI Max was beating on pretty much the same search terms or very similar ones that we've already been targeting and bidding for in the past. At the same time, our impressions, clicks, and search impression share went up after AI Max was turned on. So we can deduce that AI Max drove conversions from these additional auctions that we were able to win because of higher ad rank and higher quality scores that we discussed earlier. This allowed us to win more auctions than before, which helped us drive those additional reach and additional conversions. Also, some quite generic search terms which we might have been hesitant to target before have actually converted with AI Max. So my recommendation is not to rush excluding generic search terms that are still somewhat relevant to your product or service, as AI Max is also looking at other user signals to estimate the probability for conversion, while all you see as an account manager is just a search term. You do not see all those additional signals that Google sees. So my recommendation is to only exclude something that is 100% irrelevant. For example, if you're selling women's apparel and someone searches for some men's specific item and you know you're not even offering that, you can exclude it. But if something is in the neighborhood of what you're trying to target generally, don't exclude it. Now, if you decide to test AI Max in your account, how do you actually do it? Well, you essentially have two options. Option one is a 50-50 campaign experiment, and option two is basically to just turn it on and let it run. Both approaches have pros and cons. When you go with a 50-50 campaign experiment approach, you're going to have a clear performance evaluation with seasonality element taken out of it. On the other hand, there are some setup limitations with experiments, like if a campaign has a shared budget or if it's a part of a portfolio. Plus, experiments usually take longer because you should allow some ramp-up period for the test campaign before the experiment can even properly begin. So if you're in a rush to test AI Max ahead of Black Friday, for example, the second approach, which is just turning AI Max on and measuring the results, might be a better choice for you. The downside of the second approach is that it will be harder to evaluate the results, but luckily with AI Max, we have pretty good reporting available, and that is what we did in our testing as well. So if you're working with a large account with a good amount of conversion data coming in, the campaign experiment is not really that necessary. However, the most important part of testing, whatever testing method you choose, is to stick with it. Because if you launch this test and in 5 days or in a couple of weeks you cannot handle it anymore and you stop the test, effectively all this testing spending will go to waste. You essentially need to commit to a test, let it learn for at least 2 months, and evaluate your weekly performance. If you see a positive weekly dynamic over time, this is a good sign. And if you don't have the budget or the patience or courage to withstand this period of elevated spending with low return from AI Max, then I recommend not even starting with AI Max. And if you test it and AI Max doesn't work for you right now, you should probably test it again in 6 to 12 months, because usually Google's new features get fine-tuned and improved over time. So if it doesn't work for you right now, learn from it and test it again in about a year, and maybe it will work better. Here's another video I think you might find helpful, but basically that's it when it comes to AI Max. Good luck with testing.